안녕하세요. 저는 Robert입니다. 만나서 반갑습니다. Before you adjust your set, that's about 80% of the extent of my Korean knowledge after a week's worth of lessons. It's not quite that bad, but it feels like it. The one thing I have learned in a week's worth of lessons on a foreign language that's very different from English is that old brains don't work as well as young brains, and I am really finding memorization to be a challenge. Words and phrases I learn in the middle of a lesson, by the end of the 30-minute lesson, I've forgotten them already. And so the 30 minutes a day that this program I'm using the Pimsleur program, the 30 minutes a day that it touts is turning into 30 minutes a day of a lesson and then another 30 to 60 minutes of review for me. They do have a wonderful array of review tools, but I am finding that I forget things very quickly. And so it's going to be a struggle, but it's fun. I promise I'm not going to inundate you with my Korean knowledge step by step, but somebody in one of the comments last week mentioned that I should introduce myself in Korean on one of my videos. So I figured I would do that and get that out of the way. For those of you who are following the Booktube prize, that is now complete. We announce the winners tomorrow morning. That's Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. The video will be scheduled to go live at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Booktube prize channel. Not on this channel, but on the Booktube prize channel. So make sure you set your reminders for that and go check out the winners of both the nonfiction and fiction divisions. I finished my Booktube prize challenge, which was to read all 96 long-listed titles between the announcement on February 1st and the end of the competition on September 30th. And I finished with about 8 hours to go, but I did make it. I had a pretty good sense that I was going to make it, so the last couple of weeks I actually slowed my reading pace down a little bit. I don't think I'll do that whole challenge again next year because it just completely dominated my reading for the year, as you can imagine. I'll probably read all of next year's fiction long list, and I'll be much more selective about the nonfiction that I read. There were a lot of books in the nonfiction field that just were not books for me, and so I read them out of a sense of obligation to my challenge, but they probably weren't ones I would have or should have picked up on my own because there were other ones that I didn't pick up that I would have gotten more from. Not to say that they were written poorly, they just weren't necessarily books that interested me as much. So I did finish the challenge, and as of yesterday, I started reading a book that I wanted to read just because I wanted to read it, which was a very freeing feeling. So let me give you a quick recap of what I've been reading and what I've been watching, and we'll go from there. The first book I finished was the last of the novels of the 48 on the fiction list, and that was Bunny by Mona Awad. And even after finishing this book, I'm not 100% sure how to describe it if you haven't read it. It is about a young woman, Samantha, who goes to an MFA program in New England that's described as very experimental, very avant-garde, very cutting edge. And she's part of a 5-person cohort in this year's nonfiction or fiction studies group, and they're all women. And the other 4 women are like Stepford wives. They call each other Bunny all the time. They dress, like cupcakes. I mean, it's just absurd, and it's hysterical satire. Samantha hates these girls at the beginning, and her descriptions of them are just scathing and devastating and hysterical. But very quickly, Samantha gets pulled into their circle during this last year of their program, and it almost takes on the feeling of a cult. That may be too generous. And so it's all the things that ensue from that. And so by the end of it, I'm not sure if it's fantasy, if it's all a fever dream, if it's a satire of MFA programs, if it's mental illness. There's just no way to describe the things that happen in this book. They don't make any linear logical sense. They're not supposed to, but they don't. And for me, that's a real struggle because I'm a very linear person. But I enjoyed it immensely, although I have no idea what it's about. So if you like that kind of thing, and I like campus novels, so this is always going to be something that's going to draw my attention. If you like that sort of thing, give it a try. It's fairly brief. It reads very quickly. And it was funny. There were some times where I was just nodding my head going, yep, that sounds very familiar with when I was in grad school. The other one, the last one for the Booktube Prize Challenge was the last of the nonfiction titles. And I didn't intentionally leave it for last, although that seems to be appropriate because it's the one I anticipated liking the least, and I really did dislike it. And that is Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. It's supposed to be a woman's account of spending some 8 years researching into women's desire, and she decides to focus on these three specific women. I'm not 100% sure of why she chose these three specific women, whether she just had the most access to them or not, but she spent an inordinate amount of time researching these stories with these women and with their friends and so on. But the book is so full of sweeping generalizations that she has no foundation for. At one point, she even goes into one of the men's heads and explains what he was thinking, although she has no way of knowing that. She's just speculating wildly. So that it's filled with sweeping generalizations. It's a dismally done argument. It has very little to do actually with desire. It has to do with a lot of other issues, but not really desire. And it's just awful. Booktube has not been kind to this book, and I thought, well, maybe I'll be different. Maybe I'll be, a counter indicator for this book. But no, I'm right along with everybody else. This one's just bad. So that finished off the project for me. Since then, I have started 2 books. One is kind of a long-term, read a little bit each day book, and the other one is a brand new novel that just came out. The longer-term book is A History of Korea, and I need to get this author's name correct. It's by Kyung Hwang. Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventures read this book. She and I talk about Korea all the time and Korean language and Korean culture. And she read this book and highly recommended it. It was one that I was looking at already, but when she told me how good it was, I went ahead and ordered it. I've only read the introduction and the first chapter so far. Each chapter is about 10 or 12 pages. So it's one you can read in chunks. And it's very good so far. I'm looking forward to getting into it. My area of interest lies in the second half of the 19th century. So we're starting all the way back in the 600s, going back to the founding of Korea itself. And it's really fascinating. It's going to be good for me because it will give me some of the historical and cultural background and context that I don't know as I'm trying to make sense of the 19th century story that I hope someday to tell. A book that I've been meaning to write for about 150 years now. So I started reading that, and yesterday I started reading Fredrik Backman's new novel, Anxious People. I'm a big Fredrik Backman fan. I've read all of his books and novellas, and have loved most of them. I think of all of them, my favorite is still the very first one, A Man Called Uwe. And Beartown is a close second, but I really like his books. This one's a little bit different in character. It's about a hostage situation, but it's told in such a way that it's almost absurd and ridiculous and funny rather than really scary and threatening. And I'm about 130 pages into it already, and I'm enjoying it. I don't think it's going to be one of my favorites, but I'm really glad to have his new one in my hands. The other book that I'll be reading soon is this month's selection for the BARTERHORDES BACKLIST Book Club, and our October selection is A.S. Byatt's novel from 1992, I want to say. It's from the 1990s, Possession. The subtitle for that is A Romance, but it's a romance in the academic tradition rather than in the Hollywood tradition. And so that's a reread for me, but it's a reread from 30 years ago almost. I remember I read that book. That was the very first book I read the weekend after I finished my PhD comprehensive exams. and that's after a year's worth of reading for that one exam. And so my brain was so fried when I read it. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember thinking it was very good. So that's what I'll be reading at some point soon. I have a stack of books that I want to get to right away that are ones that I've either purchased or received from publishers this year that I just haven't had a chance to pick up yet. As for movies, I haven't watched any movies this week, but I have been watching K-dramas a lot. I'm in the middle of a K-drama festival. I finished the one I told you about last week, which is called Signal, which is a police procedural detective story with a dual timeline. The dual timeline, though, has a twist to it in that the two timelines affect each other and can change each other. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And I enjoyed it. I'm not a big police procedural fan, and so for me to really love one of those, it's going to have to be just the absolute best thing ever made. But I really did like this one. I think it's really well done. Right now, I'm in the middle of watching 3 K-dramas, which I don't ever do, but some special circumstances came up. I started watching one on my own called Hotel del Luna, which is part romance, part fantasy, part horror, which I don't usually do, part comedy. It's about a hotel in Seoul that has been around for 1,000 years in various formats. And it doesn't show up for everybody. It's a hotel where people who have died and have not immediately gone to the afterlife kind of come and stay while they get their stuff in order before they move on to the afterlife. The woman who runs it has been running it for 1,000 years. She's caught between the end of her mortal life and the afterlife, and she's running this hotel. And something eventually will release her, but she doesn't know who it will be or what will cause it. And the other lead actor is a human who ends up working for her because the hotel is registered as a hotel in Korea and pays taxes. So it needs an actual human to deal with things that human society requires of it. And so the romance is between those two, of course. And it's very good. The horror is not so over-the-top brutal that I couldn't watch, although there were a couple scenes where I watched between my fingers, that kind of thing. But they stop short of going too far for somebody like me who does not like horror. There are just some scary scenes in there. And the makeup, of course, is frightening. But it's also very funny, and so it's really charming. I'm liking that one a lot. I'm about halfway through that one. And then I started one of the brand new series on Netflix, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. No, yeah, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which, of course, bothers me as an English teacher because of the split infinitive. It should be it's okay not to be okay, but they didn't do it that way. And it's absolutely terrific. I'm doing this as a buddy watch with a friend of mine who goes all the way back to my freshman year in high school. We've been friends and have kept in touch off and on over the years. She is my longest running friend. And her daughter has watched a lot of K-dramas, and I'm trying to push her to watch some with her daughter. And she said, why don't we watch one together? I said, okay. And so we're buddy watching It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And it's just wonderful. And she is really perceptive. She's getting a lot of things that I'm just kind of halfway noticing. So it's been fun to watch. And then our little K-drama appreciation group is doing its October group watch of one called Sky Castle. Oh, It's Okay to Not Be Okay is about mental health issues and trauma, and the main story between the two main characters are a children's fairy tale author who writes really gruesome fairy tales. And she is arrogant and proud and rich and haughty and demanding. She's over-the-top diva. And then there is a caregiver who works at various mental health institutes whose older brother is autistic. And so he often moves when his brother gets traumatized by something that happened in their past. So he moves like every 8 or 10 months, and he's gone to all these different hospitals. And he runs into contact with this female author at an event, and it brings them into each other's stories, and it's just so well done. The other one that I'm watching with the group is called Sky Castle, and Sky, S-K-Y, is an acronym for the 3 major Korean universities. And the castle is this group of luxury condominiums that these people live in. I haven't figured out exactly why, but for some reason, apparently they live there rent free. And these are like billion won condos. But it's very much a Korean Aunt Becky type story. These are people who are all type A personalities pushing their children into the top universities and the lengths and costs they will go to get them in. Some ethical, some not ethical. And I've only watched one episode so far, but it already has ended on a cliffhanger. So it's gonna be all over the place. But it has some of my favorite actors in this that I've seen in other series. So that one looks like it's gonna be a really good series to watch too. So that's what I've been watching. A lot of K-dramas. I'm watching 3 or 4 episodes a day, trying to keep up with the 2 buddy reads and the one I'm watching on my own. And I'm reading a couple of books, and I am still cycling. Yay, I've had 1 back spasm since I started, but that seems to have gone away again, so fingers crossed. And I'm still doing my Korean lesson every day. I'm not doing any writing right now, but I've started 2 big undertakings in the last 10 days, so I'm kind of going to stay on course with those and see how it goes. So I hope you're all well. Please join the Booktube Prize channel tomorrow for the announcement. And I guess I'll talk to you again soon. Kamsahamnida. Thanks for watching.